Hello, I'm Anna Groundwater, Principal Curator of Renaissance and Early Modern History here at National Museum Scotland. And here we are standing in my main gallery, the Renaissance Gallery, in the Kingdom of Scots on Level 1. I've decided to call my tour today, Living in Renaissance Scotland, the Highs and the Lows. And here we are very much on a high point. The themes I'd like to cover are to do with transition and transformation in 16th century Scotland. Firstly, that Scotland was changing from a medieval kingdom into something that was affected by the Renaissance taking place all over Europe. Secondly, that Scotland was undergoing a religious transformation from a Catholic country with ties to Rome and France through a Protestant Reformation, a peculiarly Presbyterian Reformation, and increasingly in step with England. This century also sees the strengthening of monarchical power of the Stuart dynasty prior to dynastic union with England in 1603. James V, Mary Queen of Scots, and James VI. These are the monarchs ruling as we go around this Renaissance gallery. This was obviously elite living, and I'd like to show you some of those objects that a nobleman or a laird, the family of a laird, might live with. The first one of these is this amazing set of carved wooden panels, which were from Threave Castle, the home of the mighty Earls of Douglas, and they were probably carved in the late 16th century. You can see all sorts of activities going on here, including, it's thought, one of the first representations of a Scottish bagpiper. But you can also see a man practicing archery, another tumbling, another on a horse. These panels originally framed a bed, but in the 19th century they were transformed into a book cupboard by the antiquarian Joseph Train. Moving on, we can see more carved wood forming the physical background to daily life, carved wood being one of the main mediums for decoration and indeed portraiture. These wonderful wooden panels with the carved figures of the Cathcart family were made to celebrate the marriage of these two people, John Cathcart and Helen Newell, in 1606 at Killochen Castle in Ayrshire. They're a representation also of a transformation in art in 16th century Scotland, where art that had been primarily concerned with religion was becoming more to do with the self and with portraiture. However, in contrast to that are these next panels from a slightly earlier period, the 1530s, before the Reformation. These magnificent carved wooden panels were made for Cardinal Beaton, perhaps for his dining hall in the castle at St Andrews. He's a religious man, so we see some religious motifs here, including the Tree of Jesse, the Annunciation, and the Arms of Christ, designs from a Book of Hours. But we come now to a secular theme, these royal arms of Scotland with the two unicorns, the thistle and the rampant lion. Imagine dining surrounded by this splendour. This was elite living. Moving on, here we have some instances in these two cases of some items that might have been used in such grand Renaissance settings in Scotland. On the left is the Galloway mazer, a feasting cup of wood and engraved silver made for the prosperous Edinburgh merchant Archibald Stuart and his new wife Helen Aitchison in 1569 by the Edinburgh silversmith John Gray. It has his coat of arms engraved on the outside, with the rampant Stuart lions demonstrating his familial links with the powerful Stuart clan and the king. It's consciously referencing a way of life based on kinship and lordship with traditions of hospitality and feasting. The powerful lord handing round a cup filled with wine to cement loyalties and demonstrate his status. But while Stuart had noble relations, he was also part of a powerful network of rich Edinburgh merchants on the borough council, and he became provost in 1579. Inside the mazer, a wry proverb belies his wealth. "Ane good man is to be chosen above great riches, and loving favour is above silver and above most fine gold." And to the right, we have a display of Renaissance jewellery associated with Mary, Queen of Scots. You can see her here in this cameo heart-shaped locket. But what I'd like to focus on are the pennycook jewels, this very fine set of gold filigree and enamelled jewellery, a locket with miniature portraits of Mary and her son James, and 14 pomander beads hanging below it. They date from the late 16th century, and traces of perfume have been found inside the beads. The set is said to have belonged to Mary and given by her, shortly before her execution in 1587, to her lady attendant Gillis Mowbray. A descendant of Gillis married into the clerks of Pennicut family in the 17th century, and the jewels have been preserved by them as major relics of Mary through the next centuries. They're a stunning example of the rare survival of Renaissance jewellery. And there Mary is, in resplendent glory, a plaster cast of her tomb in Westminster Abbey, commissioned by her son James VI and First, when he succeeded to Elizabeth I's throne in 1603. Moving on now into the Monarchy and Power Gallery, we go very much from the highs of Renaissance living to the lows. 16th century Scotland was undeniably a violent place. And here in this case, we can see the swords, the dirks, the ballock knives or daggers that would have been used in such violence. There were different types of fighting going on. The wars between England and Scotland, in particular the rough wooing of the 1540s. There were the internal civil wars of the late 1560s and early 1570s between supporters of Mary Queen of Scots against those of her son James. And there was fighting between families, prosecuting the blood feud. The blood feud has come down with a bad reputation as a sign of a chaotic society. But more recent research suggests that the blood feud could act as a kind of informal private justice in a time when formal judicial systems were less developed. You can see in the case some of these weapons. Firstly, a two-handled sword from the 16th century, a claymore which was more used in the Highlands with IHS for Jesus Christ on its blade and scabbard, and in the centre a ballock knife or dagger, probably made around 1500, a more secretive type of weapon. But moving on now from the violence on display in this case of weaponry, we come to a case concerned with crime and punishment. The second half of the 16th century saw a newly insistent Stuart monarchy cracking down on crimes it had previously tolerated, such as the blood feud. It was aided in this by the new Protestant Church, with Kirk sessions regulating not only religious behaviour, but secular life too, for instance against scolding and slander. This object here, known as a branx or iron gag, was used to enclose the head and to suppress the tongue, with a plate projecting into the mouth. It was used to punish offences like scolding, particularly by women, or slander. But it was also known as a witch's bridle. This brings me to the main focus of the case, which are the notorious witch hunts in Scotland from the later 16th century, following the criminalisation of witchcraft in the 1560s. These implements were used to torture and punish witches. They also tell the story of the prosecution for witchcraft of Agnes Sampson and her alleged coven of witches at North Berwick in 1591. Here you have an image of them consorting with the devil, and in the background you can see a ship on a roiling sea, bringing back James VI with his bride Anna from Denmark in 1590. It was alleged that Agnes and her cronies were whipping up the sea to drown him. All these so-called witches were arrested and brought into Edinburgh to be interrogated, and you can see this in the image on the right-hand side of the case. James VI himself was involved in their interrogation and subsequently wrote a book, Demonology, on the importance of catching witches. The case ended hideously, with Agnes being garroted and burnt on the castle esplanade. And you can see the implements here used to torture alleged witches, the thumbscrews, the witch's collar, also known as jugs. These were used to get confessions out of witches and to encourage them to name their accomplices, and this they did. So many witches were accused that this caused panic and hysteria, which led to waves of witch hunts in the 1590s, in the 1620s, and through to the later 17th century. So moving on from here to another form of ultimate punishment, we have the shock and awe of this maiden, a guillotine, the first one of its type in Britain. It had a lever which raised the iron blade, which then slammed down on the condemned's neck, It was an extremely efficient killing machine, far more certain than the axeman, and was used in over 100 public executions from 1564 to 1710. It was also portable, and here on a map by Gordon Rothermay of 1647 is where it was set up, by the High Cross to the east of St Giles, or up at the castle, or down in the Grass Market. It's an awesome machine, and its purpose was not only to cut off heads, but to scare those that saw it, to inspire fear and respect for the law and the king. It's a powerful statement, too, of the authority of the Stuart monarchy. Ironically, the man believed to have suggested the idea of a beheading machine, the Earl of Morton, came to a sticky end, executed by the Maiden in 1581 for his complicity in the murder of Mary, Queen of Scots' husband, Lord Darnley, 14 years previously. And in the distance, you can see again Mary's tomb, Mary lying in death alongside her long-term foe and close cousin Elizabeth I in Westminster Abbey. But lying in rather more resplendent glory, her son James's tribute to her youthful beauty, in contrast to the wizened portrayal afforded to an elderly Elizabeth. Mary triumphing in death, as she did not in life. If you'd like to know more about any of these objects, or to ask me any questions, I'm on Twitter @agroundwater.